Hello, divinities. Welcome to Awaken Kemetic Divinity, where I provide knowledge for the newly awakened to help them build a better spiritual foundation. My name is Jay Simone, and today I'm coming to you with a book review. The book we will be reviewing is Letters to a Starseed by Rebecca Campbell. My purpose of doing these book reviews is so that you don't have to waste your money on buying spiritual books. There are a lot of spiritual books coming out right now, and not many of them are useful or contain any sort of relevant information that will actually help you grow on your journey. So I'm going to waste my money and buy the books and suffer the heartbreak so you don't have to, just like I do with tarot cards. I chose to do this because I'm an avid reader and I definitely love just accumulating knowledge. I've always loved accumulating knowledge, and I have a whole bunch of books that I cannot wait to read and review with you guys. In this video, we're going to discuss my thoughts on this book as someone who has worked with the Letters to a Starseed Oracle deck, but I will also be taking the point of view of someone who has not worked with the Letters to a Starseed Oracle deck and is just brand new to their spiritual journey. So there's going to be two perspectives I'm looking at this book with. Now, this is going to be a long review, so buckle up, buttercups, because we are going to go ahead and get into it. I do want to say that I got this book after I got the Oracle deck because I really like the Oracle deck. I thought it was beautiful, and I totally recommend getting the Oracle deck if you don't have it. However, I will say, as someone who has worked with the Oracle deck, I felt that the book was a bit of an expansion on the guidebook that comes with the Oracle deck, and that if you're someone that works with cards and you get the Oracle deck and decide to work with the Oracle deck, I don't think you need this book. However, if you're someone who does not work with cards as part of your spiritual practice and you're brand new to the spiritual community, then I would lean more towards getting this book. So I'm sure you're wondering, what is a starseed? For those that don't know, starseeds incarnate on this planet from other areas of the universe in order to help raise the vibration of this planet. How do you know if you're a starseed? Well, if you ever feel out of place for any particular reason or don't fit in with your peers, perhaps you may be a starseed. You may also be a starseed if you feel an intense longing for home, or maybe your skin starts to crawl once you become fully conscious of being in a human body and having the human experience. Well, actually, that last one is just me. But maybe if you share that sentiment, just leave a comment, because I can't be the only one who feels like their skin is crawling sometimes. Anyways, take that definition with a grain of salt, because you could have other things contributing to why you feel the way you do, as to feeling out of place or feeling like you don't belong or fit in with your peers. I feel that a lot of terms and definitions, along with symptoms like ascension symptoms, are very generalized and don't really narrow in on a lot of things. And so it's really easy for people to suddenly identify with these symptoms or label. I do want to say though, if you want to be a special snowflake and identify as a starseed, I will not stop you. However, you may want to do some shadow work and check in with yourself as to whether or not that's a part of your ego, or wanting to hold on to some sort of sense of identity or importance, because you shouldn't want to be a starseed just to be a starseed, or identify as a starseed just because you want to be a starseed. But I digress. Going forward from the definition of what is a starseed, overall, I felt like the book was a lot of repetitive information. As I mentioned before, if you have the Oracle deck, you don't really need to read this book. However, I will say Rebecca does a good job of identifying a lot of different techniques and activities that you can do should you want to kind of deepen your spiritual practice. However, I feel like a lot of these activities to deepen your spiritual practice are not something that I would recommend for a beginner, especially since this book is aimed at towards beginners, which is why I have mixed feelings about this book. But let's go ahead and get into it. So this book starts off with a section called Earth, and Earth does a good job of introducing the spiritual awakening to the beginner, along with explaining to the beginner that there's a lot of soul work to be done as part of this incarnation. Page 10 pulls this idea together, where Rebecca states, "I would like to add here, particularly in the West, we've become so disconnected from the land and our own ancestors that this feeling of displacement can also be heightened in a physical way, and it requires deep work to address it." You may feel disconnected or cut off as you start to do your introspection from your spiritual awakening, and that is a common thing that happens when you go through spiritual awakenings, and I definitely think that Rebecca does a good job of bringing that to the forefront of the reader's mind and letting them know that they're not alone when they start reading this book in the section Earth. Rebecca does a good job of explaining why we should not seek out spirituality as a means to escape, especially on page 10 when we continue with When we check out or bypass the difficult or uncomfortable, we are avoiding the reality of the human experience. This is extremely important as you look at this from a soul perspective, because even though you may have that intense longing of not wanting to be here, we need to see our incarnation as adapting to the human experience and being open to fully experience everything that comes with being in the human experience, which is why we should not look at spirituality as a means to escape the 3D realm. Instead, we should look at spirituality as a way to be more fully present in our everyday moments and lives. Our souls agreed to this incarnation before we came here on Earth, and this is a point that she discusses later in the book, and I will touch on it as well as we continue with this review. I want to stress that we agree to the trials and tribulations that come with being a human and these human experiences in order to continue our growth as a soul being. My only problem with her addressing this in the first section is that she starts to hint at shadow work, but she doesn't fully address shadow work until later, in which she devotes about 2 pages, and I say 2 pages because it's just the front and the back, to shadow work. Now in this section, Earth, she talks about looking into who we are as a soul and looking back on our previous incarnations, which is a great idea in and of itself, but it's not something I would recommend for a beginner, especially since when you want to look at ideas of looking at your previous incarnations, that requires you go into altered states of consciousness. And the only way you can really enter these altered states of consciousness is by having experience with meditation, which a beginner may not have. So this may be something that you want to later come back to, but read over just so you have a general idea of it, especially within the spiritual community, because if you just start to dive in, you may find that many of us spiritual practitioners talk about these types of things, but you don't know where we're coming from with it, and it can sound a little crazy. So I think by introducing it in the beginning, it allows the beginner to immediately integrate into the spiritual community and understand like what other more experienced practitioners are talking about. However, it's just not something I would recommend a beginner to do or get into, even though she puts it at the beginning of this book. And again, this is a book that I believe she has geared towards spiritual beginners. I feel that she does a good job of expressing like the seriousness of this type of work, though, the work of the soul in previous incarnations, on page 51, where she says, if you're called to work with your past incarnations, there are many skilled practitioners who can support you in doing so, which is definitely something you want to look at if you find it hard to do these practices on your own. But again, these are practices that you may not want to attempt until after you have more experience on your spiritual journey. She also goes on to say, however, as with any kind of soul work, be discerning and only ever do this work when genuinely led from within. Now, I say this because as interesting as it could be to look at any sort of past life experiences, it's very easy to get caught up in who you were previously. And though you may want to acknowledge who you were previously in a past life, please be aware that you aren't that person anymore. And the goal of this incarnation is to be more present and aware of what you need to do for this incarnation for your soul as to what happened previously. However, past life work, and she mentions this as well as you read the book, can be good in identifying soul patterns, which may be why you could be led to do this. But meditate on this a lot and talk to your spirit team and see if this is something that you need to do prior to doing it. But also don't attempt this type of thing until after you've gotten more experience. I also want to note that she mentions working with other spiritual practitioners, and as much as I like the idea of being connected within the spiritual community, there are, and she says, I know she's referring to something else as using discernment when working with this, but I also want to say you want to use discernment when choosing what kind of spiritual practitioner that you want to work with. Not all spiritual practitioners in the spiritual community are looking out for you. A lot of them are just looking to do whatever it is that they please and misusing their spiritual abilities, which is going to come back as karma for them later. But you just want to make sure that you're being wary of who you're going to entrust your energy to, whether it be you choose someone to perform Reiki on you or to do a tarot reading or any sort of divination on you that you yourself are not doing. or if you feel the need that you need to go deeper into spiritual work, just be aware of who you're letting be your hypnotist if you decide to get a hypnotist or stuff like that. If you're someone that comes with a very strong traumatizing background, you may even want to have a therapist involved in this type of situation, because there could be a pattern of traumatization that has happened through your previous lifetimes, and you want to be able to express and go through that trauma in a safe environment. So that is another reason why you want to use discernment as to who you work with for this soul work. Getting back to the shadow work chapter, this chapter doesn't come until after going over the Akashic records, which, as I mentioned before, I feel is a bunch of very advanced soul stuff that should not be addressed by the beginner. And I feel like she could have gone into more detail with going over shadow work as opposed to just writing 2 pages on it. I do want to say though that she does a great job of introducing shadow work by stating that Earth is a planet of polarity, and that is why we need to do the shadow work. She expresses ideas of a lot of the spiritual community focuses on being love and light. However, with that focus on being love and light all the time, it's very easy to get lost in and forget about your shadow side. And in order to embody light, and in order to embody more light, you need to be able to recognize your shadow, work with your shadow, and integrate your shadow, because you can't have light without darkness, and you can't have darkness without light. Our purpose here is to be able to bring those two together and to work with those two and transmute darkness to light and work with light to heal darkness. And she continues to go on with the shadow work chapter to outline, in some cases we have chosen to incarnate in this time in this body to a particular family to break individual, ancestral, or collective patterns, as well as our own soul stories. This is extremely important with shadow work, because you will find that as you do shadow work, you may have trauma that was passed on to you by your parents, which came from their parents, like that just passes down through the generations because people don't work with healing them, and you may be the one to finally heal that in your line. Or you may see that within the community that you're in, there are patterns that people repeat, and you may be the one to break those patterns within your community. But I want to say I see this chapter as lacking because she doesn't really go into how to do shadow work or the questions you need to ask yourself in working with shadow work. I do have a video on shadow work. It is a short video. It's on my TikTok, and I'm going to do an expanded version eventually for my YouTube channel. Please wait on that if you guys are interested in doing shadow work or feel like you need help with doing shadow work, because I feel like definitely with this book, it doesn't do a good job of introducing shadow work or going into shadow work or just shadow work overall, which is, like I mentioned before, is extremely important, especially since one of the things that you start to do as you spiritually awaken is that you try to embody more light. And in order to embody more light, as I've said previously, you need to be able to embody also more shadow. And when I say embody more shadow, I don't mean that in a way like you're going to cause harm to others, but you're going to work with your traumas and kind of integrate those into who you are to pour out more light into this world. What I do like about the later chapters in the Earth section are that she goes over the behind the scenes pre-incarnation and post-incarnation soul setup, such as identifying your soul family, your soul gifts, and soul loss. My only problem with her bringing this up later is that I think that this would have been a section better suited for the beginning of the book, so that way the beginner kind of knows more of the background behind the spiritual awakening other than just feeling out of place or feeling a need or sense of home. Moving on to the next section of this book, it is titled I Remember, and it asks you, why did you come here? I Remember is intended to go over why our soul chose to incarnate, but as I mentioned before, it just feels like a lot of repetitive information because, again, this is all stuff that we looked at in the previous section called Earthed. We are asking ourselves again, why did we come here? Why did we choose to incarnate? What patterns are we looking at and trying to heal from? And what in this human experience are we here to experience? I feel like these, as I mentioned, these chapters are repetitive. I feel like these chapters in this section I Remember are just rephrasing what was said in Earth, which may be a good idea, I guess, for a beginner if they're having trouble with grasping these concepts. But as someone who is familiar with spirituality, this section is really unnecessary because you already grasp a lot of those concepts that were discussed and earthed. One thing I did like about the section I remember is the chapter called Weight of the World, in which Rebecca brings in a new idea where she says, you're not personally responsible for the way the world is, which I think is extremely important because she notes that a lot of starseeds feel like they're here to save the world or they're here to do something big, but they don't know what that big thing is. She states, you do not personally need to carry what you didn't create, even if you're here to change it. And that is super important because in spirituality, though we identify as all one in a sense, or as reflections of each other, you do also want to maintain your unique soul identity as well. There's a reason why you uniquely are who you are and what makes you different from, say, your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad, even though we are all reflections of just the source or God. I think this also kind of echoes the current trend in self-care or prioritizing self-care, because you do want to balance how you're helping the world with how you're taking care of yourself. And sometimes even just taking care of yourself, and this is probably a concept that I believe she may bring up, but I also could be quoting someone else from the spiritual community, so I do apologize because I don't remember who. I consume a lot of spiritual content constantly. By raising your own vibration, you are still contributing to raising the vibration of the collective, and raising the vibration of the collective is a good thing and an important thing to do. So it is completely okay to feel that if a lot of what is going on in this world is just too much to take in, if you are someone like me who doesn't like watching the news because all it is just depressive information and hearing about the constant suffering of your fellow man, again, she states it's totally okay. Like, if you feel like you can't take on that responsibility or role and maybe you just need to take care of yourself. I also think this is important for people who come to the spiritual community with mental illnesses of any kind, such as depression or anxiety or anything like that. Myself, I go through depression and anxiety, and sometimes it can be very hard to push yourself to get out of bed or to get yourself to eat something. And I recognize that some days I'm able to take on everything the world throws at me, and some days I can't. And she definitely reassures the reader, if they are also having those same types of feelings, that it is completely okay and that they're not alone in feeling that way, and that they just need to make sure that they can do the best that they can where they're at. And that is something super important within spirituality, is that you want to do the best that you can with where you're at in your journey, because that's all that really matters, is that you're making the effort or the attempt to improve yourself. You're still building on, you're still contributing to raising up your own vibration, raising up the vibration of the collective. And the reason for that being is that you're not being discouraged, because discouragement is more of a low vibrational feeling, and giving up is also a low vibrational feeling, whereas the idea and drive to persevere is a more high vibrational feeling. This idea of saving yourself continues on through the next few chapters, especially in the chapter A Time of Great Upheaval, where she states, again, you are not here to save anyone but yourself. No one is here to save anyone but themselves. We must become responsible for our own actions in the past, present, and future. And that is super important, and something that a lot of spiritual people come to recognize, is that they are responsible for their actions, for their life, for pretty much everything. They take responsibility for that and, again, integrate it. Now, I have mixed feelings about like how, where responsibility lies when it comes to trauma. So I don't really want to discuss that too much, but there are a lot of the things that you can control. Spiritual people will take responsibility for things that are within their control. So say, for example, you are dissatisfied with your job and you want to get a new job. That is something within your control. However, if there's trauma such as war going on and people suffering and worldwide hunger, that is something that is more of out of your control. Like you're only one person, you can't take on all of that. And she's stating that even though we try our best to contribute to causes that help with that, it is completely okay to recognize that you may not be able to save everyone, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. You should feel bad that that type of darkness exists in this world, but don't bring yourself down with recognizing that you cannot take on that darkness. As I mentioned, she even goes into the idea of the whole saving yourself helps everyone, where on page 122, she states, every person who frees themselves frees humanity a little more. Every person who heals themselves heals their ancestral lines a little more. New seeds of freedom are planted, and those seeds with the right nourishment have the potential to create a whole new humanity. So again, ripple effect. If you are doing what you can for yourself, because that's really all you can do at the time and that's all you've got control over, it's going to ripple out from your life and from to those around you, and those around you will be affected, and it'll keep spreading. So the next section that she has in this book is called Plant Yourself Here, How to Feel More at Home on Earth. She brings in the idea of being fully grounded in your current incarnation despite being aware of previous incarnations and other stuff like that. But that just sounds like, again, I'm repeating myself, and this book is repeating itself because that is something that we've already looked at within the previous chapters. The balance of being present in the current reality along with recognizing what other factors from previous incarnations or in previous reality or other realities, because there are alternate realities, could be affecting you at this time. But the alternate realities thing is another discussion for another video at some other date. I don't know when, because it's a lot. Spirituality is like a deep rabbit hole, and once you dive in, you don't get out. However, I do want to state that the Plant Yourself Here section has even more activities to get in touch with your spiritual abilities, because a lot of people have different spiritual abilities, whether they're highly sensitive, they're empaths, or even what goes under the umbrella terms as psychics and the 5 clairsenses and all that other stuff. You may even find yourself with some regular hobbies or traits that could be considered as part of your spiritual gifts. Like maybe you have an eye for interior decoration, so you help with raising the vibration of the room, which helps raise the vibration of the person who could be in that room. Or maybe you like making art, so maybe people that see your artwork have their vibration raised just by being around your artwork and experiencing it. And I definitely think that with these activities that she includes in this section, it definitely is something that a new divinity can get into and take advantage of. She also gives instructions for meditations, and these instructions for these meditations are super easy to follow. But again, as someone who has experienced in meditation, so what I mean by that is regularly meditate and have a habit of meditating. I meditate at least 3 to 5 times a week, because trust me, I'm human, I'm not gonna do it every day. Meditation is very hard to adapt to as a beginner, especially when she is trying to. So if you're a beginner and you decide to try these meditations, it may take you a few times before you find them to be effective, or you may just want to skip them altogether. And just by pursuing meditation outside of this book, such as using an app or using guided meditations on YouTube, you will find that it'll give you a chance to practice at getting your mind to that altered state of consciousness that is needed in meditation to pursue some of the ideas she has with her meditations here. But these activities that are in this final section do give this book longevity for spiritual practitioners who pick it up that are in their beginner to intermediate. I don't want to say intermediate because the journey is always continuous and we're always learning and growing as souls in this incarnation. But once you get familiar with going through meditation and experiencing meditation, this book does have longevity because you can come back and do these activities once you have more experience if you're a beginner when you first read the book, and then you go separately to meditate, which again I mentioned before. And you can also go back and do the Akashic record stuff that she mentions. Once you get through this, once you've gotten used to meditation, once you've perfected your protection and all that other stuff, because again, altered states of consciousness are going to call for protection, just because you want to make sure you're watching out and not getting into things that you may need to call in your guides or angels for. So another thing that I want to add in my review of this book is just my perspective overall. I am a Black woman within the spiritual community, and I feel that, and many other Black people may feel this as well, a lot of the spiritual community, the faces of the spiritual community is more Caucasian or white, which is no surprise there, as many of our standards of beauty are, European based. So now they're kind of changing towards taking from African American culture, but that is going to be a lecture / rant for another day, or not at all, because y'all, I have some thoughts on some things, and there are times when I want to share them, and but I digress. Anyways, what I want to say is, it's no surprise here that a lot of the faces of the spiritual community are white people. And no, Karen, we do not want to hear how enlightening your trip to India was. No one cares. I just want to say that to me, the language of the book comes off as inclusive, and working with the oracle decks that Rebecca has made, there is a sense of inclusivity to them. And I like that she uses a spiritual language that is very easy to integrate with a lot of different spiritual paths. So even if you don't fully align with just the idea of spirituality, if you're Christian coming to this and you're coming at spirituality from a Christian point of view, but you still recognize, because I say this loosely because sometimes you can kind of miss this with Christianity, if you are open to seeing the spiritual side of Christianity, or if you come to this with like a Buddhist background or atheist background, I don't know how you'll relate to this with an atheist background, just because it still kind of focuses on the idea of there being a God, because without God, there is no collective consciousness. What I'm trying to say is, regardless of your spiritual background, whether you are someone that is pagan, you can still relate to what is talked about in this book. The author does a great job of making this well known, because she has a part in the introduction where she says, "I have great respect for all traditions, practices, and paths, and the human right to choose. If I use a word or phrase that is not the same as those you use, please feel into the energy and devotional intent behind it and replace it with your own word or phrase. All paths, faiths, belief systems, traditions, and people are welcome here." And I hope that you feel that in these pages, which I think is extremely important to recognize in spirituality, that recognize that your soul chose to incarnate as who you are for a reason, and you would be doing a good job to like honor your soul and yourself by also honoring the traditions that come in your DNA, applying them to spirituality. Because like, as you look at it, as you look at other religions and as you look at other spiritual perspectives, you kind of see they have some of the same ideas. And so it's very easy with seeing that they have some of the same ideas to integrate that into whatever you practice, or applying it, or translating it into however your practice or religion views something. I also want to stress that by respecting the spiritual practices of your ancestors and what comes to you through your DNA from your current incarnation, not Karen who believes that she used to be some kind of high priestess in Egypt, but just say Karen realizes that she has some kind of Celtic background and wants to pursue spirituality, like looking at the spiritual ideas that come with Celtic background and going into those deities and energies. That's what her takeaway should be. And I think that by doing that, we build a stronger connection to the universe in our current incarnation. I also appreciate the fact that this author, Rebecca, did not gloss over the pain and suffering of previous generations. That was super important to me as a Black American, especially since even now there's still a lot of division. And as she mentioned in the book, the Earth is a dimension of polarity. On page 149, she acknowledges the need to heal from all of the past misdeeds of our ancestors, such as slavery, and just we've got misdeeds that were done on Asian Americans, we've got misdeeds that were done on African Americans, we've got misdeeds that were done on Mexicans, we've got misdeeds done on literally everyone. And we need to reflect on that, and I feel that's not discussed enough within the spiritual community. People are so quick to gloss over it or ignore it like it never happened, and that is not something we should do. We need to see it for what it is, see it for what's happened, and by looking at this, we keep it from repeating. Not only that, but again, shadow work. We look at the darkness and we integrate and heal from that darkness, so that way we can embody more light. We cannot do better unless we recognize and acknowledge what we previously did, or what was previously done to people. She does a very good job of supporting this idea by stating that we can hold the frequency of oneness and also acknowledge what's been severed. We can appreciate the world's ancient traditions while still acknowledging the brutal persecution that's occurred. I think it's important that she addresses that, because within spirituality, it is also easy to find that there are people that are trying to culturally appropriate certain things and practices, such as personally myself, or personally my opinion is white sage. That is something that is for indigenous peoples and something that we have no business working with unless we are of indigenous lineages. And even then, we should still be very careful about like where we get the white sage from, because as I was doing research regarding white sage, articles were reporting that like there are not enough left for the indigenous peoples to use the white sage for what they need it for, because spirituality is all the rage right now. Every Becky and their Karen want white sage to cleanse, when there are plenty of other options to cleanse a space, such as sound bowls. You can use incense, you can burn other things like cedar, rosemary. There are so many options to cleansing, but everyone wants to use white sage, and not everyone should be using white sage. The other reason I want to address cultural appropriation within the spiritual community is that a lot of Caucasians have a lot of nerve with taking and stealing from these other cultures, indigenous cultures, Eastern Asian cultures, Southeast Asian cultures, literally any culture on this earth, even though they've been doing that since the dawn of time. And then they will discard the rest of the information and then proceed to label said cultures as savage or primitive, and just further disrespect those cultures while still practicing certain things from these cultures and using teachings from these cultures. They even go so far as to claim that whatever they take from these cultures is their own original idea. For example, the Bible. Yes, I said it, y'all can fight me in the comments and I can argue this some other day, but the Bible essentially has a lot of passages and stories that come from other cultures that were around the area at the same time. And there are even like passages that line up with the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And if I noticed this as a kid, like if I noticed this type of shit as a kid, it should be no problem for you to notice it as an adult and see it for what it is. There are stories that are very similar to what was in the Bible by other cultures that have been repeated way before the Bible was written. And again, I bring this up because the spiritual community is dominated by Karens and Kevins. Further emphasis on her acknowledgement of our different the different cultures that are within the spiritual community, or the different peoples and colors that are within the spiritual community, can be found on page 57, where she states, we must see how special and unique we are while also seeing the same uniqueness in others. To acknowledge that we haven't been seeing that in others, to stop our divisive ways by first acknowledging we've been part of the division, whether consciously or unconsciously. And I think she does a good job of nailing that point home with that statement. My other thoughts on this book is the format of this book is that the book is written to be read in very small snippets, like chapters are only like a few pages long, almost like you would be reading a blog post, or maybe, you know, just reading an online internet article, which I mean, is great. I guess it would be more fitting for like, I don't know, Gen Z. Yeah, Gen Z, because I'm like considered a millennial. But like, I don't know. I love reading and I love diving into stuff. And so to me, short chapters like this just is really weird, and I'm used to chapters being like pages. But yes, the chapters are in like a very short snippety format, like you're reading a blog post or you're watching a TikTok video. My final thoughts on this book is that I would rate this a 3 out of 5, just because I think it could have been significantly shorter, maybe about like half, no, even less than half. We could have just stopped with the section Earth and called it a day with the amount of information that was given. Or she could have integrated a lot of the information that she put into I Remember and Plant Yourself here into the section Earth. And not only would it have made the chapters longer, which for someone like me would have been way more enjoyable, it will also stop the repetitiveness of the information, because like I said, we could just stop with Earth and called it a day. I think that this book sounds a few steps above the usual spiritual boho chic white woman that thinks that crystals and essential oils will cure her entire existence. You know, the one that's meditated at multiple spiritual sites and thinks that she's so enlightened because she's culturally appropriated other spiritual practices because we're all one. You know, that woman, that Karen. Like, I'm all for, you know, natural remedies and stuff like that, but like, like, you have to draw a line somewhere, and you need to go see a doctor at some point. Like cancer, go see a doctor. Essential oils aren't going to cure your cancer. You know, you can't fucking heal like a broken leg with an essential oil. Like, please guys, if you're going to use natural remedies, please still be working with a doctor and getting like actual medical treatment that has been proven to actually treat whatever issue that you're encountering, because a lot of the natural remedies that people come across is really just anecdotal evidence and there's no scientific backing. And I feel like that's something that's super important, even as someone who is spiritual, that you have those things that have that scientific backing. Back to the rest of this review. I do not feel like you need this book if you have the Oracle deck, which I stated at the beginning of this video. And I do feel like a lot of the activities in the book can definitely help you grow spiritually. However, they're not meant for beginners. As a beginner, you may still want to do other things separate from this book, such as learning meditation from guided meditations and stuff like that. And I also think that a lot of activities to grow spiritually can be found in other books, such as The Psychic Witch, which I will have a review on very, very soon. This book review took me so long, and let me start off by saying, guys, I am a perfectionist. I am so picky about how I present to you guys here on YouTube that presenting this book, like, this took me so many takes. And not just that, but then I also had to reread it because I didn't realize I wanted to review it until after I'd already been like 2/3 of the way through it. I've had to reread it. I've had to take multiple takes. I've had to fight discouragement of shooting this video because I know that this one's gonna be extremely long, and I know it's gonna be a pain to edit, and I know it's gonna be I felt like my notes for this were a little everywhere and it was very hard for me to talk through it. Psychic Witch may take me a little bit of time, but hopefully I will get that done soon for you guys. Again, I would recommend this book to someone if you've just become conscious in the last 5 seconds. But yeah, those are my thoughts on this book, Letters to a Starseed by Rebecca Campbell. If you want to see more book reviews, or if there's any other particular books that you guys want to see, please leave comments in the box down below. I definitely want to hear from you guys, and as I mentioned in other videos, I want to be able to have a community here of spiritual people just learning from each other, so that way we can all grow and help raise the vibration of the collective. Thank you for watching Awaken Kemetic Divinity. Jay Simone, wishing you a good rest of your day and good vibrations. Bye.